can do it. There we go. All right. This is Rebecca again. Welcome to the October meeting for the CCBA. Just a few announcements before we get going, and I turn the floor over to Burton. So first of all, big news. In November, we're going to be having a hybrid meeting, in person and Zoom. It will be on the second Tuesday of the month, and it will be held at the Kiwanis Club. And Phil and I think that we figured out how to also be able to live stream that via Zoom. So you can join via Zoom, you can join in person, and as always, we'll have the recordings available for you to watch and rewatch afterwards. And the content for this meeting is going to include a few mini presentations at the beginning, and then it will be followed up by a panel discussion that's not specific to the presentations. It will be pretty much anything that you want to discuss and bring. So you are encouraged, if you have a small presentation that you would like to share with the rest of us, or if you would like to be part of the panel discussion or nominate someone for that, please feel free to do that and reach on out to us. The December meeting, another big news excitement thing. We are going to be having our Christmas party at Starlight Mead on December 17th. We'll be having a potluck, and we'll also be having a silent auction. And we might be having a cooking with honey contest, but we aren't sure yet. Also, B School is coming up in 2022 in two different formats. We'll be having the single day in-person B School that the CCBA has historically run. And then we'll also be continuing on with our Thinkific on-demand offerings, the current basic beekeeping, and then we hope to also add in an intermediate beekeeping course. And please stay online until the very end of tonight's meeting, because there will be one lucky winner who will receive a prize from our random name picker wheel. So with that, I am just going to introduce Burton briefly, and it kind of goes back actually to when I had the opportunity to present for his club last year. I think it was actually almost exactly a year ago. And I really enjoyed having that opportunity. And during that time, it became very evident from the questions that Burton asked and stumped me with that he had a great body of knowledge as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Burton Beasley. And I look forward to hearing him talk to us about fall management and overwintering strategies.
Can everyone see that? Can everyone see those PowerPoint?
We can.
Yeah, and so interesting, Rebecca mentioned Starlight Meadery. I am possibly going to be supplying him with honey for mead, not for this year, but possibly for 2022. He actually contacted me about some bulk honey, so yay, I can actually get some maybe some mead over there with some of my honey, but from the Piedmont Mountain region, North Carolina, but certainly. So tonight, as Rebecca mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about fall management overwintering strategies. Come on, screen work. All right. So one slide I always include in all of my presentations is this one. Doesn't matter the subject matter. Things to consider before we begin. What are your goals for the year? Hold on one second. I think the thing is asking me to admit somebody. Great. So you need to consider that what are your goals for the year coming up. We're in the sort of lull of the year where things are starting to wind down in our bee year, but the beginning of the bee calendar starts December 21 on the winter solstice, where each day begins to get gradually longer. And so that is the beginning of the honeybees year, even though it doesn't coincide with our calendar year. So right now is the time to be thinking about your goals for the upcoming season. Maybe this year you were a beginner beekeeper, and this year was your first year keeping bees. And so maybe you, I wanted to keep my bees alive. So next year, what is it? I want to make honey. Maybe I want to pollinate, increase the number of hives that I have. Maybe I want to maybe I've been keeping bees for several years, maybe I want to try and raise my own queens. All of that stuff requires extra equipment. And right now, equipment, supply stuff, whether it's jars, whether it's bee equipment, whether it's bee supplies, whether it's bee feed, whether it's bee medications, a lot of that stuff is in kind of a limbo state on how fast you can get it and when you can get it, because of the COVID situation, ongoing COVID situation. And it's created a backlog of delivery and shipments. And so things like glass jars are hard to get, but also certain things that we would normally see as our beekeeping suppliers would keep in stock are hard to get. So right now is the perfect time to get that stuff ordered, get it in advance. Of course, if you're going to want to make honey for next year, and you haven't had honey in the past, you need supers, you need extra frames. If you're going to do pollination, maybe you need more bees, you need more equipment. If you're going to increase the number of hives, you're going to need nuke boxes or full-size hive bodies. And then if you're going to raise queens, you're going to need queen rearing supplies, whether that's mating nukes, queen castles, queen rearing supplies, grafting tools and things. So right now is the time of the year to start prepping for your next bee season for 2022. Get the stuff in, get it in advance, have the equipment ready in advance of the season. It's always a problem once we get on into spring to get the stuff in a timely manner, but the COVID situation has exacerbated that situation such that sometimes where it might have been 2 weeks to get it, now it's 4 to 6 weeks to get it. So just make sure you get your orders in advance. And of course, good record keeping is key. I'm the worst person at record keeping. I always get out to the bee yard and what the heck did I do to this hive? Or is this the one that I needed to requeen, et cetera, et cetera? And so do as I say, not as I do. But certainly with record keeping, with all the little modern day devices that we can carry out there, whether it's your smartphone, tablet, you can put a layer of saran wrap over your phone or your tablet, carry it out there, do some recordings, actually dictate to the phone, what you're doing. And the saran wrap over the phone keeps propolis and all that sticky stuff from getting on the phone. But or you can record and then go back later and actually do a physical copy, or actually if it's nothing else than taking a spiral bound notebook out there and writing it down, just do some record keeping. That's going to give us some kind of idea of what worked, what didn't work for the season. And that'll become important in some of the slides going forward. So a little bit of introduction about myself. My name is Burton Beasley. I'm a NCSBA master beekeeper through the Master Beekeeper Program, soon to be Master Craftsman, and I am a Eastern Apiculture Society. So whereas our organization is state-based, that's a regional-based organization. That's basically the Eastern Seaboard. Got my EAS Masters this summer in Kentucky. I'm the current second vice president of the State Bee Association. I was a regional director before that, but sort of like the mafia, you can't get out, they drag you back in into something else. And so I'm continuing to be a part of this wonderful state organization that we have, and in the largest state organization in the country, and glad to serve you beekeepers and you chapters out there as part of that. I am what you consider a sideline beekeeper. I'm not a full-on commercial. I have a full-time job, but I'm not your regular backyard beekeeper where I have a few hives or maybe a couple dozen hives. I manage anywhere from 1 to 200 colonies on average, sometimes more, sometimes down around 100, but mostly I'm sort of in that sort of 150 to 200 range. And that's usually about what I overwinter. I do nukes, I do queens, I do honey production, I do pollination services, and then we use wax and and propolis to do other products of the hive that we have to recoup some of our expenses throughout the year when we do craft sales. And then I do a e-commerce site where I sell honey and beeswax products. So we utilize everything from the hive. So that's how we do it. Pollination services, at like Eve does it down there on the bottom, one strawberry at a time. As mentioned, I'm an officer with the North Carolina State Bee Association. So what is going on this November? We will be having an in-person conference. Typically, the North Carolina State Bee Association has a spring and summer meeting. This summer, things were still up in the air, particularly with the new Delta variant, and with liability, and with our membership being primarily the demographic of older folks that might be more susceptible to COVID. We did not deem it wise to hold the summer conference, but we did push it to the fall. Things are trending the right way with the virus and with people being vaccinated, such that we feel that we can get back together in person, and we will be doing so the week before Thanksgiving. And that will be a Friday and Saturday, November 19th and 20th, and that will be in Hickory, North Carolina at the Hickory Convention Center. It is an abbreviated conference. We won't do all the workshops that we typically do, but we will have main stage speakers. We have some quality speakers coming. We have Scott McArt from Cornell. He's trained extensively under Tom Seeley, so you can expect that kind of caliber of speaking. We have Frank Rinkovink from the USDA ARS in Baton Rouge. Frank's been doing a lot of work with amitraz resistance, and then also some of the viral loads and stuff that they're seeing with commercial bees, but also certainly bees that are being sold to our backyard and sideliner beekeepers. So it should be, and we've got some other in-state speakers, whether at a university level or whatever, that should be very well received, and good subjects and good topics. If you never attended one of these, we're going to have all of the vendors, a lot of the vendors that you would normally get cataloged from. They're going to be there in person, have woodenware, have extractors, have bee supplies for sale. So if you've never attended one of these, this is a great way to get involved, sort of get your feet wet in the state conferences. But certainly we're looking to be back full on for 2022. We have a spring meeting planned in New Bern on the coast again for March 3rd through the 5th, 2022. And then next summer, we will be back in Hickory for July 28th through the 30th there at the Hickory Convention Center. We've got some wonderful speakers planned next year, big names like Stephen Rapaski, and my brain went blank. We've got Bob Benny. We've got a lot of other high name speakers coming in for 2022. So please do look forward to those. I think both of those meetings will be very, very well attended, but certainly we would like for all of y'all to be involved. And we'll look to have workshops and all that stuff at both of those 2022 meetings. So please do attend those, and we hope to see you at the fall convention, and certainly try to get things back on track towards this in-person model, and get people back doing what we're used to doing, which is the biggest part of beekeeping, which is certainly fellowship with other beekeepers. So going into what we have as far as fall management and winter management, problems that we face statewide, nationwide, mite levels and viral loads. Mite sampling is key. This point in the year, particularly, most of y'all are completing your treatments or maybe finalizing your treatments for the year. Mite sampling, sugar shake, alcohol wash, sticky bowl. In most of North Carolina, because we are so humid, alcohol wash is the most effective way. Yes, you kill 300 bees, but it is the most effective way. Certainly way better than a sticky board where we put it up underneath our screen bottom and leave it for 72 hours and have to physically count all those mites on there. Sugar shake is still reliable, but not as reliable as alcohol wash. The reason I say that, they've done this experiment. In fact, Kim Flottam did this. They took the same 300 bee sample, shook them for 2 minutes, sampled the mites, put another tablespoon of powdered sugar in there, shook them, sampled the mites. They did that 5 times, and every single time out of those 5 times, they got additional mites. So that tells us with the humidity here that we don't quite get maybe the accurate counting. Of course, you've got to take into consideration mite sampling methods that we have right now. They are the best that we have, whether it's a sugar shake or alcohol wash, but we're only looking at about 15% of the piece of the pie, because on average, 80 to 85% of the mites and developing mites are under the cap brood. So when we're doing these mite assays or mite samplings, we're only looking at about 15% of the mites that are out in that phoretic stage, actually out on the adult bees and the nurse bees and things of that nature. So we're only looking at a small piece of the pie. They are coming out with some new sampling methods, but those are on the horizon. They're not here now. So we've got to utilize what we've got. And so the sugar shake and alcohol wash are the best, but alcohol wash is better than the sugar shake. Being able to recognize economic thresholds of mites, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But then treat if necessary. And I'm not advocating for chemical treatments or non-chemical treatments, but I utilize the example that if my child was sick, just like these bees, if my child was sick, I would not just say, well, they're not strong enough, they're not going to make it, just going to let them die. And the same thing holds true with my bees. If they're laden down with mites, I'm going to do something to try and alleviate the problem, whether it's positive controls or whether it's chemical controls. But I'm going to do something. I'm not going to just let the bees die. Particularly in my situation as a sideliner, I can't afford to lose 35 or 40% of my bees every year, and then have to recoup, and then also try to manage the bees to produce honey, and then have bees to sell to individuals. So that's not a sustainable model for myself, but also not a sustainable model for most of us going forward. So treat if necessary. Food and nutrition is a big problem. Enough food, quality food. There are lots of feeding supplements out on the market. Some of them work, some of them do not work. Pollen substitutes, of course, if the bees don't have adequate pollen supplies or protein supplies, there's certainly powdered and pollen substitutes that we can feed. And then the debate onto 1-to-1 versus 2-to-1 syrup. 2-to-1, of course, is a heavier syrup the bees can utilize to add weight this time of year, versus the 1-to-1. It takes a lot more feeding of the 1-to-1 to get the efficient weight on the hives to get them to overwinter, but it is certainly is utilized. So want the bees to be well fed. And I often stress this to new beekeepers in my area is, when we're removing honey, we're removing surplus honey, but we don't want to remove so much honey such that the bees are trying to depend on us to feed them, plus the fall flow. I love steak and baked potato, but I don't want to eat that for every meal, just like bees probably don't want to eat that goldenrod and aster honey and pollen for every meal. So, maybe consider leaving some of the resources back for them, such that you're not having to spend a lot of money on these supplements. Certainly in the fall and winter time of the year, queen and colony failure is an issue. We're looking at things such as cluster size. Is there sufficient bees to cover the frames such that they're going to overwinter fine? Do we need to reduce them down? Amount of brood present. Is there brood present in all stages? Are there eggs, larvae, and cap brood that's fixing to emerge? Is that a sign? Are we not seeing any of that, such that we might be suspect of not having a queen? And then eggs and presence of eggs is certainly a sign that we have a queen. But a lot of times this time of year, we do see dwindling of bee population, but also a dwindling of brood production. The dwindling of brood production does not mean that we don't have a queen, but if we're seeing eggs and larvae and cap brood present, then certainly we have a queen. But when we're not seeing any of that, or we're just seeing the latter, which is the cap brood, and we're not seeing any eggs or larvae, certainly that would be a cause for queen failure. And what we've seen increasingly is that people buy spring packages. That's not to beat up on the package producers, but when we get early season packages, they're maybe not made it the best. And so we see queens sort of wind down this time of year, and we see a lot of queen failures in the fall. So it's better to take your losses in the fall than to try and baby something and end up failing much later, such that let's cut our losses this time of year. And then certainly in the fall and the winter of the year, diseases and other pests may be present. The bees start winding down brood production, and it's a great time for our friends, the wax moth and the small hive beetle, to gain a little foothold. So we need to be very vigilant, and we need to reduce the hive down in size, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But also certain diseases such as European foul brood, and then certainly nosema, which hasn't been a major issue, but it's still very much present. We see some of that in the fall when we have this sort of cooling down, and then all this condensation, and then lack of oncoming foraging food. So making sure our bees have good nutrition coming in, whether we're providing it or whether it's natural, is good to help out with some of those diseases as well. So some good resources to go to: the Honeybee Health Coalition, the Varroa Management Guide. I cannot stress that enough. They have a wonderful website. It shows management techniques. It shows your integrated pest management methods. Has research studies. It has videos on the management and use of all the current miticide products that are on the market for North America. So how to put them in there. If maybe none of your local beekeepers have ever showed you, or you don't have idea of how to do a sugar checker alcohol wash, it shows you on there how to do your sampling. But then it shows you how to apply those miticide products, and it has a list of all the efficacies on that. So whether we're implementing non-chemical positive controls or chemical controls, it gives you detailed information on what's more effective on controlling the mites at certain times of the year. So very beneficial for us, and very useful information. Bee Informed Partnership is another one. A lot of their information is survey and management practice based. They have beekeepers that give them information, whether it's on a national level, a regional level, or even a state level. There's lots of stuff that can be gleaned from those surveys, whether it's on bee losses or management techniques being implemented by beekeepers at certain times of the year. So maybe you you can participate. It's wonderful. Don't lie on it. Give them good information. If you have high losses or you have low losses, share the information, and other beekeepers here in state or regionally can look at, hey, this person or these persons had very low loss levels, and they were doing this. They were doing the supplemental feeding, or they were feeding pollen patties, or they use this miticide at this time of the year. So there's lots of useful information that can be gathered from that bee-informed partnership surveys, but certainly they also do a lot of research projects and then information that can be used, whether it's studies on miticides or hygienic bees or whatever. They do a lot of research projects as well that are out there, practical in the field, not just lab controlled projects. So great information on there as well. Understanding Varroa. We talked about that economic threshold. Look at those two curves where that orange curve starts that downward turn and that blue peak starts to go above the orange peak. That's what becomes the economic threshold. That threshold keeps changing. I remember when I first started beekeeping, the mite levels, they used to say, well, anything at 3 to 5 was 3 to 5 per 100 bees. So we take a 300 bee sample, we divide it by 3, and we get our mites per 100 bees. And that's our percentage. So when you look over here, danger control promptly, that's our percentage. So that would be 3 mites per 100 bees. So that would be in a 300 bee sample, that would be nine mites per 300 bees. So 3 per 100. When I first started beekeeping, it was 3 to 5. Now it's anywhere from 1 to 3 or 2 to 3, depending on whose information. And this table comes right out of the Varroa guide for the Honeybee Health Coalition. But again, these models keep changing as we develop more understanding. We do know that through some of the work here at North Carolina State, that the virus levels, which are the big problems, but also some of the feeding of the mites is also a problem. They don't necessarily correlate. So a high mite load in a colony may have very little viral load, but you may also find a high viral load in a colony and find very little mites. So there's no direct correlation between viruses and the number of mites. But the one thing that we can control, we can't control the level of virus in the hive because we don't have antiviral products that we can put in the hive, but we can mitigate mites. And so that's what we do. So we try to manage the mites and hopefully cut back on the viruses that are there, but there's not a direct link and they don't understand why. I know Aaron McDermott at Dr. Tarpey's lab has done a lot of work with that, but certainly we don't understand why those two don't correlate. But the one thing that we can manage is the number of mites. So fall management, mite treatments continued. And why does this dang guy, supposed to talk about fall management, why does he keep talking about mites? Why? It's not been that long ago, here just a few years ago, a 60-year belief that the Varroa mite fed on the bees hemolymph or blood was viewed as science, and the science changed. Dr. Samuel Ramsey, which is going to be one of our speakers next summer, found evidence that the bees did not, in fact, feed on the hemolymph or the blood of the bee, but they actually feed on the fatty cells or the vitellogenin of the bees. And so when you hear us as beekeepers, experienced beekeepers, and your apiary inspectors, why do we harp on mite treatments for fall and winter management? The winter bees rely on those fatty cells to be able to make it through to spring. When they're clustered, it's cool and clustered, the bees can actually consume some of those fatty cells inside their own body. to be able to generate heat such that they may be able to reach food stores, or maybe it'll sustain until they can till things warm up outdoors, outdoor ambient changes, and they can reach some of those food stores. So the fat cells are, when we talk about skinny bees versus fatty bees, very much rely on keeping those mite levels down, monitoring for mites, treating when necessary, or applying secondary. And I will say this, and it's a has become sort of a presence maybe in sideliners and commercial beekeeping. What we're seeing is where we used to could get away with one primary treatment per year and the bees would be fine. Now we're seeing that we're having to apply a second round of treatments. That's not so much that the mites are tolerant or they're becoming resistant to the treatments that we're using. It's a lot to do with when we're treating and the seasonal changes with the weather and or climate. Whether you think climate change is real, we're certainly seeing seasonal warming has changed, and so the bee season, the bee buildup has started earlier, and so such that the varroa mites are certainly building up earlier in the year. So we are seeing now where we used to get away with one primary treatment, now we're having to do some kind of secondary cleanup treatment. Usually that's a lighter product, or your, and we'll talk about that. But one thing that you guys out there toward the coast don't have to worry about, but certainly up here where I'm at, I'm in the foothills, kind of in between the Piedmont and the mountain region, but I do haul bees up to sourwood crops, and some of your coastal and sand hills beekeepers do haul bees up to the mountains for that. It presents a unique challenge for harvesting your spring crop, and then to get your bees treated and healthy to take up for the sourwood, and then to turn around and bring the bees back and then have to treat again. And so that is a unique thing that's unique for here in North Carolina, but certainly Georgia and Virginia and Tennessee, where we're in the Appalachian Mountains, where there is a high prevalence of those sourwood or sorrel trees. And so that does present a unique challenge to be able to get those mite levels in check. Biggest thing this time of year, checking food stores. There is aster and there is goldenrod coming in my area. It was very late. It is blooming now, but typically it would have already been blooming back in September. It's really blooming now. I don't know whether it's we had some late frost, but then we also had a lot of dry weather this summer, had an extended dearth. I don't know whether it's going to be the bees are going to have enough to build up weight on that, or we're going to have to do some additional feeding. I think we'll have to do some additional feeding. But the way we check for food stores and weight is either one, we go into the hive and we look, make sure that the bees outside the brood nest area have frames full of capped honey, nectar, and pollen, or by doing a process what we call is hefting. You go to the lowermost brood chamber, stick your 2 fingers in the back of the hive in the handhold and pick up. If you can easily pick up that hive, it probably does not have enough weight on it. But certainly if you're picking up on it and then you're about to give yourself a hernia, it may have enough weight on it that they can get by with very limited to no supplemental feeding. Of course, this time of the year, we get a lot of complaints about, well, I think my hive has foul brood, because people, particularly new beekeepers and inexperienced beekeepers, go out there and they smell something stinky. It smells like gym socks, or it smells like just a cheesy sort of funk. But that is your goldenrod and your aster. It does have a very pungent smell, and the honey does have a very dark appearance and kind of a pungent taste. It doesn't taste like a gym sock, but it is certainly stronger than your spring honey. But certainly being able to understand that that's what the bees are getting this time of the year. This time of year, we need to be inspecting the brood nest about every other week. looking at the amount of bees, eggs, brood present, make sure the queen we've got queen sign. We don't have to look for the queen. But as mentioned, queen failures are commonplace. If we can get a queen, if we notice a queen failure this time of the year and we can actually get a queen, then we catch it in time such that the bees still have plentiful brood and resources. We can requeen. Certainly that window is closing really quickly. Or what most of us will do is we have a queen right hive and we have one that's queenless, and we will newspaper them together and combine the hives such that we have one really populous hive with a queen right colony. And then there becomes a time where we get hives that just dwindle down and dwindle down, and they're not going to make it. Yes, certainly we can shake those bees into another colony if they're queenless, but usually there's a viral situation that's related to that, or some sort of issue, whether it's queenlessness or viral related, such that they continue to shrink down, and then they end up queenless or maybe not. But we need to cull those out. It's a management decision, but cull out the weak ones or combine where necessary. And there's no need trying to baby through a little hive. I know we all want all the bees to survive, but sometimes there becomes a point where it's just like, we're going to baby this thing through and it's not going to make it anyway, and we're going to waste time and resources trying to get it through. So combine it, cull it, however we want to, whether it's shaking the bees into another colony or squishing the queen and then combining the bees and what little bit of resources it has into another colony, or maybe a nuke or something. Those are management decisions that have to be made as part of this stewardship of the bees. As mentioned, there's our sourwood bees, and that does present a unique problem when we take supers off and put more supers on, and then have to haul those bees back now to be treated, or maybe treated a second time. So that's something unique for the North Carolina mountains, particularly the Appalachians. Fall management. So continued, good nutrition and low mite levels are key. We mentioned those mites. Not only do they vector all sorts of nasty viruses, but they feed on those fat cells that the bees depend on to generate heat, to stay in cluster, to not be sick, to be able to get to food stores, to be able to feed other bees in that cluster, having lots of nutrition, whether that's beekeeper provided or whether that's nature provided. If nature's not going to provide, then us as beekeepers and stewards of the bees, then we need to provide. I know there's a lot of people that don't want to feed their bees sugar syrup. I understand it. I understand the criticism, but if the bees don't have enough resources, feed them the sugar in whatever form you want to make sure that they're not going to starve. And that's our responsibility as beekeepers. And I would rather the colony not starve, because we just don't want to give them sugar syrup, than we give them the sugar syrup and they still make it. So whether it's beekeeper provided or nature provided, let's make sure the bees have what they need. As mentioned, feed if necessary. 2-to-1 syrup this time of year is best to add weight. Pollen substitutes, pollen patties. The bees are still bringing in natural pollen from goldenrod and aster until we get some serious frost. A lot of those goldenrod and aster will still continue to produce on into November as far as pollen and a little bit of nectar, mostly pollen. So bees may not be as keen to take pollen substitutes, but certainly putting pollen patties is asking for, if you just throw a whole on patty, is asking for a small hive beetle balm in your hive. That's a perfect place for those small hive beetles to reproduce. And then you go back to your colony and you've got all these little maggots in that pollen patty. If you're going to try and give your bees pollen patties, there's certainly reasons to and types of patties to give. Don't put a whole one on there, and maybe cut them into thirds or fifths and give them a little piece. Certainly right now in this time of the year, they don't really need it. They're still natural pollen. But when we shift on into that winter season, on into late November, December, there's very little blooming, and so a little piece of pollen patty to help them sustain them with brood production is good. And then the powdered substitute, I typically will put out powdered substitute around the week of Christmas. The bees will different ways to put it out. I usually put mine out in a bucket and set them out in the yard, or I'll put it out in trays and then bring it in at night. But certainly the bees, if they need it, they'll take it down and they'll utilize it much the way they do natural pollen and utilize that protein. Reduced entrances. Certainly, if you're feeding this time of year, you need to be reduced down to small entrances, or that's just asking for some robbing. But certainly, this is the time of year as we start getting this cooling that mice will look to get inside the hive. It's a warm place with plentiful resources, so you can put mouse guards in place, or you can severely reduce the entrance down. Keeping your hives up off the ground versus putting them down low will usually keep the mice out with the reduced entrances. Watching for signs of robbing. If you see signs of robbing, there's bees fighting at the entrance, there's bees trying to force their way in, trying to get into every crack of the hive, everything. You can close up the entrance. You can use robbing screens, stop feeding, particularly if you've got a feeder that's leaking or something, or utilizing feeding supplements that have a strong scent, Honeybee Healthy, things of that nature that have that lemongrass scent. Robbing bees can easily find that. And then if it becomes a serious nuisance and you're worried about that hive being robbed out, we can relocate those hives if necessary. Again, be aware of pests. Our small hive beetles, our wax moths, are opportunistic pests when we leave too much room on the bees. Hornets and wasps are more of a nuisance, but we have seen and some people that report that with constant bombarding of yellow jackets that hives have abscond. I've not seen that to be the case, but certainly they can be a problem. So keep those entrances reduced. Don't give them a good entrance into the hive. Reducing unused space. So if we've got boxes that are sitting on top of our colonies that are mostly undrawn or even drawn with no resources, we don't need that extra space on hive. This is the perfect time of the year. Get that off and then properly store it, whatever method you're going to use, whether you're going to put it out in UV light or plain light, keep the wax moths of it, or whether you're going to stack it up and put moth crystals on it, or the new product, which is the B5401, the BT spray that you can spray on the combs to keep the wax moths off of it. Whatever the case may be, you need to get those extra frames and boxes off of there. The bees don't need it. And then the other thing with that is it's going to create extra space that can't be warmed, and then you're going to have condensation, which going into winter could be more of a problem than the extra space or anything. So the condensation could be a major problem. Be aware and look for signs of disease. If you're noticing frames that have severely spotted brood, if we're noticing something other than the typical goldenrod smell, if we're noticing some foul odors that smell like a chicken house, or maybe like a dead fish rotting on the side of a bank, that would be a case where maybe we want to invite the apiary inspector out to take a look, or a more experienced beekeeper out to take a look. And then certainly, there's times where we just we don't get out there in time to catch it. Hive gets robbed out, or queen dies, and things dwindle down, and the hive dead becomes a dead out. Remove those dead outs and that unused equipment from the apiary. If the frames and stuff are too bad to recoup, we certainly can throw them away. But if they're not, then we can put them on moth crystals or freeze them and then reuse them for the next year. So get that stuff up and out of the apiary before what we have is a wax moth farm. So understanding cluster dynamics. Think about your cluster of bees when they're inside the hive, whether it's winter, spring, or summer, or fall. It's like a sphere, like a basketball inside that box. The bees have certain frames that they're raising brood on, but then they have the outside edges of those brood rearing areas are going to be resources. Although they have resources stored on the brood frames, they have frames of all resources stored to the outside edge. So why is that important? When outside ambient is below about 50 degrees, I know textbooks say 50, 55. Certainly, there are times where I will pop the tops on hives to make sure they have enough feed. But as the ambient drops below about 50 degrees, the bees will cluster. And as the temperature continues to drop, that cluster will tighten. There are bees that will go inside the cluster and inside the frames next to brood, and they will generate heat with their flight muscles. They'll actually get down inside the cells and generate heat next to that brood. And then the outside bees on the outside of the cluster will insulate that heat in, and then they will eventually rotate in, be fed, generate heat, and the inside bees will move out. If prolonged cold continues, if the bees run out of food available around them, the brood nest will perish. So a lot of times in the spring, we'll go out and we'll see all these bees sort of frozen to the frames, maybe some bees down in the cells, maybe a queen there present or not, but usually you see some brood and maybe a queen and the bees down in the cells. The ones that are down in the cells are those heater bees. And then there's all this honey right around them. And it's like, well, they didn't get out to get that honey. So understanding how that cluster functions will help us determine how to best get that feed right in where that cluster is at, inside the cluster, right next to the cluster, so that they can warm it, access it. Certainly in this time of the year, the fall, we want to get our weight on now and not have to do emergency feeding. But understanding how that cluster functions will let us know how to get food right there, right above them, right next to them, such that the bees won't starve and will be able to access it and generate heat. We can move stored frames of honey and nectar right at the edge of that cluster or right just inside that cluster so they can keep it warm and access it. Utilizing feeders such as our frame or division board feeders, putting that right on the outside edge of those clusters. Those work well. The baggy feeders, we're replacing it right in between the cluster or right on top of the cluster, works good. Fondant and your bee candies, I utilize those and sugar bricks as a emergency feeding for wintertime, but certainly they're good insurance. If you don't think that your bees have sufficient stores, you can put fondant or bee candy or sugar bricks on, or the what we call the camp method of just putting some sugar, not powdered sugar, but granulated sugar on top of some newspaper right on top of the cluster. It's good insurance if we don't think we've got sufficient weight or we don't know that we've got sufficient weight. And then of course your pollen supplementation with patties is certainly good. They make what we call a winter patty that has less protein in it. They have higher sugar content. Those are good for late fall and winter feeding. The normal protein patties have a higher protein content, and they can actually generate or stimulate brood production if the bees have plenty of stored nectar, honey, or we're feeding them sugar syrup or feeding them sugar where they have a carbohydrate. That excess protein with the presence of nectar or a sugar source can generate brood production. And there is a time and a reason for people like myself to do that, but maybe certainly our backyard beekeepers don't need to do that. Top feeder styles that are right above the cluster. You mentioned the baggy feeders. Some people will put the bucket feeders or jar feeders right up on top of the cluster with little and put an empty box above it. I don't like that because now you got this empty dead airspace for condensation to happen. I prefer a frame feeder or baggie or a hive top feeder that the bees can access and actually warm. Um, and those bucket feeders and jar feeders can leak. So as mentioned, be cautious if you're going to put those in there, that they're not dripping onto the bees if they lose suction. So here's some of the feeders that we talked about. The frame feeder, you can see how that's positioned there, and the left top and bottom right next to the cluster, such that the bees can access it. And then there is actually a sugar brick right on top of them. And in the middle, that's your baggy feeder, and then down below that is another sugar brick, putting it on there with some type of a ventilated shim to let the condensation and heat escape, so that you don't end up with excess condensation. And then the right top there is a jar style feeder, such to position it right on top of the cluster as well. Small form factor hives for overwintering. I utilize a lot of this. It's very good for anyone to overwinter bees like this, but it also for me, because I do nuke production and I sell bees in the springtime, this works really well. As you see here, these are multiple nuke bodies, and those are full. If we had a colony that was in, say, a double deep or a single deep, we could actually put it in these multiple nuke configurations, putting the brood in the lowermost nuke chambers with a little bit of honey to the outside edges on those, and then placing quantities of honey and pollen in the uppermost boxes. The bees don't have as much left or right to warm, and they will gravitate upwards very well in these throughout the fall and winter, and move up, and they just don't have as much to keep warm, and they work very well for overwintering bees. And then for my purposes for nuke production, they work very well because come springtime, I'll have 3 or 4 of these nuke boxes that are just full of bees and brood, and then I can easily shift those onto new bottom boards and requeen them, and then I have a new nuke to start a new hive with, or I have a nuke to sell. So it works good for overwintering, but then certainly also for the purpose if you're going to do additional split, or you're looking to increase your number of hives in your apiary, that works well. But certainly I see I know people that do this will take their 10 frame or 8 frame colonies and sort of condense them back down into these 3 and 4 hive nuke colonies to overwinter. Takes extra equipment to do that, but certainly the bees do seem to overwinter in those narrow boxes a whole lot better. It's more like a normal tree cavity, even though it doesn't have as much insulating factor as a tree cavity would. So winter management. In the cases of most winter management, we're only looking to inspect every couple of weeks. We're looking at days that we're going to have outside ambience 55 degrees or over. As I mentioned previously, if I go out to a hive and I'm hefting and it seems light, even if it's a 45-degree day, I will pop the top, see where the bees are at. If they need food, I'll put sugar bricks, or I'll put fondant, or I'll put granulated sugar on newspaper and put it above them and give it to them. But I like to get the food stores in there and the weight on the hive this time of year, September through the October season, and make sure that the bees have sufficient food stores such that I'm not having to do emergency feeding. But certainly the wintertime, if we get some of those warm days, which we've had a lot of warm days last several years, and particularly even like Christmas week, it's been almost short sleeve weather for the last several years. So it's a great time to go out, make sure the bees have sufficient food stores. Those are also good times to add those pieces of pollen patty, maybe every couple of weeks, just go back and refresh that. your fondants, granulated sugar if necessary for emergency feeding. If we save back some frames or maybe even whole supers of honey with pollen and stuff, maybe put them in a freezer to store them. We had some extra stuff come off a colony, or maybe a colony started dwindling down. We pulled it off and froze it. Certainly we can add those back as that cluster moves up. Otherwise, your 2-to-1 syrup or very thick sucrose syrup, with or without Fumagillin B. Fumagillin B is a product that helps with nosema. It went off the market several years ago and has come back on. We did not see a huge up spike in nosema cases after it was not used. A lot of commercial beekeepers used it prophylactically, but it doesn't seem that we're having as many issues with the nosema that we previously had maybe seen in the spring and the fall, and maybe certainly in the winter, but or coming out of winter. So I don't recommend feeding any kind of antibiotics prophylactically, but certainly that was something that was very prevalent in the commercial bee operations. That product went off the market, so it was not available, but we did not see an uptick in nosema cases as a result. So that's certainly good news. Dry community feeding in the wintertime of those powdered pollen substitutes. Mentioned you can put them in a piece of PVC, hang them from a tree. You can put them in a bucket. You can put them on baking sheets and set them outside. Just remember, if it's going to get cool and you're going to have condensation, to cover them or bring them inside so they don't get moisture on them and then mold. A lot of beekeepers in the wintertime and early spring used to do terramycin to maybe rid themselves of the chance of getting foul brood in early springtime. That's due to the veterinary feed directive. That product is not readily available without getting a veterinary clinic or a veterinarian involved to write you a feeding directive, and then you can buy the product. So we're not doing that prophylactically anymore, but there was a lot of commercial beekeepers I know of that, again, were doing that every spring and fall and winter. We're feeding terramycin, and we've got a very good speaker coming in November that's going to talk about antibiotics, particularly this terramycin product, and the reproductive health of bees. So come in November. Very, very cutting edge information, but certainly more of a reason not to utilize this product unless we absolutely have to, and we actually have European foul brood. Otherwise, you can use pollen substitute, but otherwise pieces of pollen patty or winter patties work well. Again, in the wintertime, sometimes we have some colonies that were sort of weak and susceptible. Maybe we didn't cull them out early enough. Take your losses late summer, early fall. Don't try to baby them along, but certainly if they die in the wintertime, let's get that equipment up before it becomes a wax moth hotel in the early springtime. So, certainly we want to ascertain why the bees died out. The NC apiary inspectors are a resource for that, but certainly more experienced beekeepers, of course, starvation. If you didn't get out there and feed your bees, make sure they had sufficient food stores, or maybe it was not great weather, but you didn't go out there and check on them and then they starved. That's 100% beekeeper fault. That's not to say that I've never had a colony starve, because I have, but we need to be vigilant and make sure the bees have proper nutrition, whether it's from us or whether it's stuff that we put back throughout the year to give them the resources. Wintertime, late fall, wintertime is a perfect time for oxalic acid. If it's above 55 degrees and the bees are not clustered, you can use the vaporization method. If the bees are clustered, the dribble method is preferred. But actually what the new studies show, and we've got another speaker coming next summer, Cameron Jack, at the University of Florida, the vaporization method in comparison with the dribble method, even in the wintertime, works better, utilizing the new concentrations that are going to be maybe going forward possible for oxalic use. So right now, the 1 gram three times once per week is what we're utilizing. They are testing some new higher concentrations, and it is thought that the EPA here in North America will allow some of those modifications to the new labeling. So we're hopeful for that, because they are seeing some dosing the bees with higher concentrations and no health issues, but also seeing more mite kill off is working. So there is some hope even utilizing that oxalic acid in comparison to what we've been doing here in North America. Considerations to moisture and ventilation may be necessary. I'm not saying that you need to put quilt boxes on your hives, but certainly if you've got solid bottoms and then you don't have very good ventilation at the top, or if you're noticing a lot of mold and mildew, maybe cracking the back corner of your inner cover with kind of shimming them up with some popsicle sticks or a nickel or a dime or something to give some dead air space on top. A lot of if you're putting hive top feeders, a lot of them will give room for some of that dead air to escape out through the feeders, such that it condenses back on the telescoping top cover. But just need to be aware of that. If you're running solid bottoms, you'll have some more considerations for moisture and ventilation. But it's sort of a trade-off. The bees build up better in early spring on solid bottoms in comparison to screen bottoms. But with screen bottoms, if you leave them cracked or leave them all the way open, you don't have as many considerations for moisture and ventilation. But bees may need some additional feeding to be able to maintain the heat in the hive. So the winter continue depending on your goals that you were set. If you're going to increase, we talked about the winter patties versus pollen patties. The pollen patties have a higher protein content, and as you're feeding, or as maybe some of the early nectar sources start coming available, whether it's your dandelion, henbit, purple nettle, or maybe even some of the early maples, with that pollen patty supplementation, the bees are going to start stimulating more brood production. That's good for us that are looking to produce additional nukes early part of the season. It may be bad for backyard beekeepers, because now you've got all this extra brood production. You've got extra brood that needs to be cared for and fed. You've got extra brood that needs to be warmed. So the bees are going to need extra resources to be able to warm that brood effectively. And the bees can easily starve out as a result of all the extra brood production. So that's one of those things where it's kind of a extra tipping point depending on what our goals are, and maybe some more considerations. So we may have to supplement the bees as necessary, or they can quickly starve, or we can end up with prolonged cold snaps, and we can get cold brood or chilled brood, or we can have bees that'll cluster up and they can't get to the food and resources. If we're wanting that extra brood production to do splits and stuff early part of the season, then we're going to have to supplement with syrup and protein supplements if the bees don't have it, or we need to put on some extra frames of honey and pollen or bee bread if we have it. Feeding that syrup in the wintertime certainly is going to take bees extra work to evaporate the water content, but then they also require extra cleansing flights to clean themselves out. If it's above 55 degrees, they can get out and do that. 55 degrees. Bees consume about a half pound of pollen per day, so that's roughly 3.5 pounds per week when rearing brood. So that's why I say when we stimulate this brood with this pollen substitute, if there's not natural pollen coming in, then we're going to have to continue that supplementation until it is. Otherwise, you're going to have a big sort of backslide in your brood production. You're going to end up with a lot of brood die off, and then possibly the bees starving out, not having enough food to care for that brood, and so they may end up sort of sacrificing some of that brood. The availability of nectar also it plays a part in brood production, but if we're supplementing with sugar syrup or sugar bricks or fondant, then that with the pollen patties will create brood production. That's why the what we call a winter patty does not, because it doesn't have that high protein content in there. So the bees are just getting mostly sugar and very little protein. Typical colonies in southeastern United States winter on 40 to 60 pounds of stored honey. Um, back to our record keeping. If we have Italian bees overwinter with large clusters of bees. They overwinter with large amounts of brood, and they continue high brood production throughout the winter season. They are going to require additional feeding or additional resources to be left on the hive. Certain other races of our honeybees are carniolans, Russians, some of the northern stocks that are coming out that are maybe some hybrids don't require as much feeding as the full-on Italians, because they are more resource frugal. They winter with smaller clusters, but then as a result of smaller clusters, they don't need all that extra space, but they don't utilize all those resources. They don't need extra feeding. So back to your record keeping, when you're buying queens or you're buying bees, or when you're looking at bringing in stocks into your bee yard, take note of that. That may not be, particularly the fall and winter of the year, when you're looking at, well, this bee has really decreased the amount of brood and frames of bees in there. That might not be a sign that your queen is failing so much as, well, it was a carniolan or a Russian or one of these resource frugal hives. And so they've really cut back brood production because there's limited resources coming in, even with supplemental feeding. So, keep good records and understand sort of what you've got there as far as your stock. Make sure that when you're purchasing bees or queens, that you kind of get an idea from the producer that what kind of stock or what is in this stock. That way you have those good notes to follow up on. That kind of will help you along through your winter management. And then, of course, as always, we say feed, feed, feed. But if your bees need it in the winter and the fall, please do provide the bees with supplementation. Don't let them starve out just because you don't want to feed them sugar syrup. I'd rather provide it and them not need it than them need it and us not provide it. And then you go out there and then now you're calling me or whoever else in the spring of the year to buy another $180 worth of bees. So I'd rather your bees survive and make it through winter, and you have a colony that's going to produce you a honey crop the next spring. So provide it if they need it, and if they don't need it, and you provide some extra assurance, whether it's candy bricks or sugar bricks or fondant in the wintertime, such that it absorbs moisture, and then the bees have something in there if they need it. That those are wonderful ways to just give extra assurance for what little bit of expense it costs. So winter sort of aftermath, when we start winding this thing down here in the next couple months where we're doing very little, as mentioned, buy your equipment, get ahead of the season, because we don't really know how long it's going to take to get the supply chain stuff back up and going following the COVID stuff. We're still seeing a lot of delays, but certainly this is a perfect time of the year to attend state conferences. It's a perfect time to read books and articles, whether it's American Bee Journal, whether it's bee culture, whether it's your local club's Facebook page, stuff that they're sharing. But certainly take this time of the year to educate yourself, particularly as your goals are going to change, whether when you start out as a beginning beekeeper, going through as a more experienced beekeeper, and the new stuff that you want to learn. Take the time to grow and evolve. As mentioned, our seasons are changing. I don't care whether you want to say it's climate change or not climate change, or whether it's just natural seasonal changes. It doesn't matter. We've seen increased warming here in the Southeast earlier in the year. And so we've got to evolve and change our methods with the bees building up earlier. And so that may mean that we need to take an in-depth look at when we harvest honey. It may mean that we need to treat bees for mites earlier, so we may get less honey off the hive, or we may have to pull stuff off earlier. That's all good things that we're going to have to evolve with these seasonal changes as well. And beekeeping is very weather related, but certainly changes every year with the blooming season and all the weather that we have, whether it's cold or hot. But we need to continue to evolve as well. Your notes, back to your notes. Study what worked, what didn't work. If you don't have good record keeping, you don't know what you did right. If you have all these colonies, you got 100% overwintering success for 2 years. Well, what did you do that? Well, I didn't write down what I did. I don't remember. I can't remember when I fed, or what I fed, or how much I fed. So good record keeping is key to let you know what worked, what did not work, what maybe we need to pursue in the future. And then again, plan for next spring, buy your equipment, go ahead and get your bee orders in. I remember when I first started beekeeping, all these producers, they did not start taking orders until February. Now they're taking orders in July, August, and September for the next year. I mean, so if you you're going to need bees, you're planning on adding more bees, and you're not going to maybe split your bees and increase, but you want to buy some nukes. Now is the time to put your orders in, or if you want to buy package bees, put them in, get them in. Otherwise, you'll be late in the season getting your bees. So get your orders in now. This is also a perfect time. We harvested honey. We've got extra wax. Maybe we harvested some propolis. We've got extra honey for crafts. This is a perfect time to look at mead making. Maybe we want to buy a mead making kit and make some honey wine. We've got extra honey that can't sell or didn't sell, and we want to do something with it. Got extra wax, make candles, make soaps, make lip balms, take that propolis and make some wound tinctures. Lots of stuff that you can do that are value added products, utilizing these other products of the hive that will help sustain and make your beekeeping model more sustainable. They help pay for your feeding. They help pay for your mite treatments. They help pay for your woodenware for next year. So all of these things are value added things that we can utilize these other products of the hive and help sustain our beekeeping model without having to continue to surge money into it. So with that, I will open up to questions.
Burton, I have a question about using brood breaks for the treatment of varroa.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'll back up a little bit because I saw a thread that actually a friend of mine had started about using the brood break and on the State Beekeeper Facebook page. And then I think it was you that chimed in and talked about your use of it. And I think you said you caged for 16 to 17 days and then you did the oxalic on 21 days.
Yeah.
So I have 2 questions about that. One is, what specific time of year do you do that? And sort of related to that, when is it too late? And do you find that you have a significant amount of requeening that happens when you do that?
This is a common process that they utilize in both Spain and Italy. However, in their summertime temperatures, their outdoor average ambients are only in the mid 80s, maybe low 80s. Whereas here, we know our summertime is all the way up through September, and we probably have some 90-degree weather or 90-degree plus weather. October would be a good time utilize that, if we were going to utilize a brood break here in the Southeast and do that. I have done that. My concern with it is I did not see increased queen mortality with it. The queens did restart. The problem is you're going to lose 16 plus days of brood production. And so and when we get into this time of year, our winter bees are being produced. And I don't like that. It doesn't work well here in the southeastern United States because you lose so much brood production and bees that would be part of your winter cluster and bees that would be out there foraging on the fall flowers that are out there, and then also bees that are going to be part of your winter cluster. I don't like it here. If we had the temperatures that they had there, it would work well. What I've found that works well, brood breaks do work well if you're looking for a non-chemical methodology throughout the year, whether it's doing splits or whether it's removing queen and doing a false swarm method, such that we break the brood and make the queens or make the colony rear out a new queen or replace that queen with a queen cell or a virgin queen or maybe even a mated queen to get a small brood break. They work well that way. But the oxalic with the extended caging of the queen here in the East United States, when we could do it, doesn't work right. You could possibly do it in the springtime. I have not tried that, doing it in early springtime, but then again, I would rather have those bees building up because selfishly, I'm looking for extra brood production and bees to make additional nukes up to sell. So possibly a backyard beekeeper could play around with that in the springtime and get some extended brood breaking and do an oxalic treatment. It does work well because then at that point you're putting out most of the mites are going to be out in that phoretic state out on the bees, and so you can do a one-time treatment. But here in North Carolina, it does not work well, and so I typically opt to do some type of a late June, July treatment, and then I will do a cleanup treatment this time of year of whatever products. I'm not going to advocate any certain products, but certainly I will do a treatment with the products that are available, and then do some type of a cleanup this time of year just to hit the ones that are had maybe a secondary mite buildup, or maybe there was some robbing going on and the mite levels build up. But I want the bees this time of year to be as mite free and hopefully as virus free as possible to raise those winter bees.
Thank you so much.
Do we have any additional questions? Going once, going twice. So they're gonna let me off the hook easy tonight, Rebecca.
I know. It's a lot easier than I got off when I was presenting for you all. So everybody stick around. We still have the spinning prize wheel here in just a moment, but before we close out the meeting, I want to thank you, Burton, so much for giving us your time and your expertise, and giving us a lot of good information on considerations that we need to be taking into account in the winter so that we can make sure that we have our bees coming out of the gate really strong in the spring. So with that, I'm going to pull up the wheel of names, random name generator. So I'm just going to give it one moment here. I think I've got everybody's names on here. I've tried to clear out the people who aren't here, but I'll just make sure if it chooses you that you are here. And 3, 2, 1. It's amazing what you can find online, just about anything if you look hard enough. David. David Jones. David Jones, I'm pretty sure you know how to get in touch with Andy to select your prize. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And if you're listening to this on the replay, I hope you enjoy this presentation as much as the rest of us did. Have a good evening.
And thank you, Chatham County Beekeepers, for hosting me and having me this evening.
Thank
and
you, Bird.
appreciate it.
Thank you.